So thank everyone for joining. It is our February installment of our 2023 Lunch and Learn series. To reiterate, this year we are doing our Lunch and Learns every last Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If there's going to be any alterations to that, I will send out an email letting everyone know. And so our first 3 months, January, February, and March, are all focusing on livestock and manure management. This month, we are very, very fortunate to have Jim Linne with us, who has a lot of experience incorporating livestock into row crop agriculture and seeing how that affects the soil. So whenever you're ready, Jim, we would love to hear more from you, and take it away.
Thank you, Adner. Yeah, I'd like to, thank Jessica and Adner and the Nature Conservancy for an opportunity to talk today about my farm. I put together a lot of slides, pictures that I've taken at the farm, and I'll go through them and try to explain what we're doing. I'm going to share my screen here. Wait a minute, I got it. Now, let me see here. This thing moved in my way here.
Oh, it won't let you hit play.
Yeah, I'm trying to hit play and it won't. There it goes. Okay. So the name of our farm is White Clover Farm. We're located in Hillsboro, Ohio. We're family owned. We produce 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef that we direct market in the Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus metropolitan areas. We follow the principles of regenerative agriculture as defined here by Understanding Ag. So the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture all focus on the soil, and particularly the soil microbes. The soil is a living, breathing ecosystem, and the soil is a foundation of everything above ground. So these are the 5 principles. The first one is to minimize soil disturbance, and that's both mechanical and chemical. So you need to reduce any type of tillage and reduce herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, all that destroy the soil life. The second one is to keep the soil covered. This moderates the temperature of the soil for the microbes. It minimizes evaporation, and it prevents erosion from wind or water. Third, we try to maintain a living root in the ground for as long as possible, because as long as there's a living root and photosynthesis going on, it is feeding and supporting the soil microbes. We try to increase and encourage biodiversity, which I'm sure all of you at TNC understand the importance of that. And then fifth, if possible, to integrate livestock. Livestock are tremendous at recycling nutrients and bringing fertility back to the soil. I'm in a grazing situation, so that's my primary focus, but it can be done in row crop situations as well. So this is the farm. It's 250 acres of tillable soil, 50 acres of woodland. We purchased it in 2005. It's a silt loam soils with 2 to 12% slopes that are in the Cincinnati soil series. The majority of the farm drains into Brush Creek and then into the Ohio River, and about 40 acres along the road frontage drains into Rocky Fork Lake. When I purchased the farm, it was being farmed conventionally in corn and soybean rotation without cover crops. This is highly erodible soil, and the soils were quite degraded when I bought the farm. So I worked with the NRCS through EQIP programs, and we built fence, we developed watering points, and we planted all of the row crop fields into permanent grasslands. So this is what we've been able to accomplish since 2005. We've increased our soil organic matter from 1 to 4%. And when you do the math on that, that required 55 tons of CO2 per acre to be sequestered to build that organic matter. The importance of the organic matter is what it does to the soil structure and function. When you increase the soil organic matter and increase the biology, you'll form soil aggregates, both macro and micro aggregates. And when you get aggregate formation, it opens up pore space. And so now we can infiltrate 4 inches of rain per hour. There are also micro pore spaces that are opened up that can hold on to that water. And for each additional 1% of organic matter, you can hold an acre inch of rain, which is 27,000 gallons of water per acre. So with a 3% increase in organic matter, we're now able to hold 81,000 gallons of water per acre. Now, as you can imagine, this is very important with regard to contamination of our waterways with phosphorus and nitrogen. Phosphorus is held pretty tightly in the soil, so the way it gets into the water system is through erosion. Nitrogen, which is water soluble, can get into the water from runoff or from leaching. But if I can infiltrate 4 inches of rain per hour and I can hold on to 81,000 gallons of water, there is virtually, well, there's some runoff on the steeper sloped areas, but there's very little runoff and probably no leaching. Some of you may be familiar with NDVI, Normalized Difference in Vegetation Index. This is a common measure of photosynthesis that takes advantage of the fact that green photosynthesizing plants will absorb the red wavelength of light and reflect the near infrared. And using this ratio, the Landsat satellite, it was Landsat 7, I think there's a Landsat 8 now, measures NDVI every 8 to 16 days. The importance of this, it allows you to measure over time how many days of the year you're photosynthesizing, known as the length of the green season. And the importance of this is every day you're photosynthesizing, you are sequestering carbon, feeding the soil food web, and maintaining soil structure. Bare soil loses carbon and the soil structure collapses. I work with Peter Donovan from the Soil Carbon Coalition, and he put this data together for me. So this is the farm on Google Earth Engine. This is the overlying NDVI data. And then this graph was generated. So when we bought the farm in 2005, we were photosynthesizing just a little over 200 days a year. And by 2017, we increased that by 100 days. And now we're photosynthesizing over 300 days a year. Comparing that to the rest of the county, you can see that in the cropland, it's 224 days, which is just where we were when I bought the farm. Pasture and hay ground is 264, and white clover farm is 316. And that has to do with the increased organic matter and water infiltration holding capacity that lets us photosynthesize most of the year, plus the fact that we have the entire farm is in perennial grasslands. I encourage all of you who haven't looked at this video, it's on YouTube by Walter Yaney. He explains how the 95% of the heat dynamics of the earth are controlled by the hydrologic cycle, and that by increasing the soil carbon sponge and the length of green, we can actually cool the planet pretty much independent of CO2 levels in the atmosphere. So we practice adaptive multi-paddock grazing. We subdivide all of our pastures into 2 to 3 acre paddocks using plastic step-in post and a single strand of polywire, which is electrified. So the cattle will graze each paddock about 2 days, and then they are moved to the next paddock. We do not come back to the paddock that was grazed until it's fully recovered, which can be as short as 20-some days in the spring and as long as 45 days in the late summer when it gets real hot and dry. So when you do the math on that, it turns out that we graze each acre on the farm about 15 days a year, and it has 350 days to recover. so that we get tremendous biomass production in that way. We always leave plenty of residual in the paddock that we graze. We try to take half and leave half. Not only does this keep the soil covered, but it allows a very rapid recovery. The grass is still in the phase 2 growth phase here and does not have to use any root reserves to start regrowing. It regrows through photosynthesis. This is a sorghum Sudan grass cover crop. We no-till drilled into one of our pastures. This is my nephew. I think he was about 4 foot tall at that age. So we put the cattle in there, and in about 2 days, I kind of overgrazed this, but it's an annual, so I didn't really care. But those cows ingested probably 6,000 to 7,000 pounds of dry matter per acre, and ran it through them and then deposited urine and manure on there. But what's just as critical when you have that kind of above ground biomass, about 40% of the photosynthesis is exuded from the roots to feed the soil microbes. So the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods, all of that complex soil food web is being fed. This is Johnson grass, which is a perennial warm season grass, which is considered a noxious weed in our county. Thousands of dollars are used in herbicides to try to control it. But on our farm, there's no such thing as a weed if the cattle eat it. So we put the cattle in there, and again, in about 48 hours, they've done that to it. It was a little bit mature, so they did leave the stems, but they ate all the leaves. If it was a little less mature, they would have eaten it to the ground. We also grazed during the winter. We stockpile fescue in a large part of our farm, and we grazed through December, January, and first week or two. We started feeding hay 2 weeks ago. We ran out of grass and started feeding hay, but we normally get into February before we have to feed hay. So you asked me to talk about manure management, and on our farm, I don't think of it that way. I just think it as another nutrient cycling issue. The manure is very well distributed throughout the pastures. Within about 1 hour to 2 hours of that manure pile hitting the ground, this dung beetle shows up. There's 10 known species of dung beetles in Ohio. This one here primarily feeds on the liquid in the manure, getting its nutrition from the bacteria that are in the liquid. He'll bore thousands of little holes throughout there. This is all due to that dung beetle drinking that liquid. And that increases the surface area of that manure pile tremendously. And there's 150 known insects that'll come in and feed on that or feed on each other. And within about 2 weeks, that's all we have left. So when we return to a paddock, like I said, we let it rest until it's fully recovered. There are no manure piles that are able to be found. They're all totally digested. So in almost all discussions you hear about the environment or about climate change, the cow is vilified. And yet I think hopefully I've showed you that if it's used properly, it's a tremendous asset. And in fact, the herbivores are absolutely necessary to maintain fertility and productivity in our grasslands. All the water we use is groundwater. We have 5 natural springs. This is one of the developed springs. This water runs year-round, doesn't freeze in the winter, no moving parts, no electricity. We always place it in the middle of a fence so we can water on pastures on both sides. We had a huge erosion gully when I bought the farm that was actually beyond repair. So had a guy come in with a bulldozer and push the dirt up into a dam, and we have this pond now on the farm that's tremendously increased the biodiversity. And of course, the cattle are fenced out of that. In the beginning of my talk, I told you that the acreage along the road frontage drained into Rocky Fork Lake. Well, this is the stream going through our our farm that runs into there. And you can see it's very well vegetated and lots of trees on both sides, and the water is crystal clear. On one side of that stream is an 8-acre field that I wanted to graze. So we built a 2-wire high tensile electric fence along the entire stream to fence out the cattle, but there was no other water source in this 8-acre pasture. So we developed a laneway down to that stream at an area where it was quite level. And then we put in a rock skirt. So now the cattle can come down there and get a drink without destroying the stream bank or without contaminating the water. We use particularly large rocks, which the cattle are very uncomfortable walking on, so they won't stand around there. They'll get a drink and leave and not stand in the water. Now, in comparison to this, right across the street from this pasture is my neighbor's field. He's a conventional corn and soybean, no cover crops. The Rocky Fork watershed about 2 years ago received a $875,000 RCPP grant, primarily to deal with the sediment load coming into Rocky Fork Lake. A little bit of nutrient load, but mainly sediment. And I'm guessing there's several tons of topsoil from this gully that's in the bottom of Rocky Fork Lake right now. So any farm tries to produce a healthy food. So this is our beef tenderloin. We did participate in a study with Jason Roundtree at Michigan State University and Green Acres Foundation in Cincinnati, looking at the fatty acid profile from different farms. These are all farms in the Midwest who are selling 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And you can see there's quite a bit of variation in there, but we're farm number 11, and we had a very healthy omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 2 to 1. And then this year, we don't have the data back, but we're working with the Bionutrient Association, looking at all the phytonutrients that end up in the meat that come from the biodiversity of the plants that are in our pastures. And lastly, we did work with the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the Cardinal Land Conservancy and placed an agricultural easement on the entire farm. So that concludes my talk. I'll try to stop share and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come off of mute and voice them, or if you have anything in the chat, I would just leave it up for a little bit in case anyone has any questions. One question I had was about, so you mentioned doing different types of testing, doing testing for phytonutrients and also for fatty acid of your content of your beef. Are there any other testing that you do for your land? Like, what are all your testing procedures?
So when I first bought the property, I tested I did soil analysis on every single field. And the only quote fertilizer I used was high calcium lime. Most of our soils were quite acidic in the 5.6 pH range. And if you want to grow legumes, any of the clovers or alfalfa, you really need pHs around 6.3, 6.4, 6.5. The earthworms like the more neutral pHs. So I added over a 2 or 3 year period about 4 tons of lime per acre in the whole farm, and all of our pHs are now in the 5.5, 6.6 area. I tested my soils every year for maybe 6 or 7 years, and then after that I haven't done that anymore. Part of that study that I did with the Bionutrient Association, we did do sophisticated soil tests, and And it was very interesting to me because all of our nutrients, all of our calcium, potassium, phosphorus, copper, zinc, everything was in perfect shape. And that's the way I assume it would happen once you focus on the biology and not the chemistry. I just don't focus on chemistry. All I focus on is trying to improve soil biology, and the biology will correct the soil.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, we have a question. We have two questions from Patrick. I'll ask them in order. The first one is, how do you, so I'm assuming specifically you, Jim, how do you get others to embrace these best practices, other farmers?
You know, it's unbelievable. So I have a neighbor who helps me out on the farm, primarily when we need to sort cattle or load and haul cattle, and then in the winter to help feed hay. And he has cattle farm. He's over at my farm all the time, and he can see the unbelievable biomass in our pastures and how well our cattle do. And yet he hasn't changed a single thing, none. And he's seen it for 15 years. So it's very, very, very hard. Very few people seem to have an open mind to this. The education is by far what's lacking more than anything. I give tours, you know, with the NRCS in the Soil and Water District. They'll have tours of farms every year. I've been on that. I talk to it, but it's hard. Very hard.
And then compare it to how things were when you first started. Are you more profitable now incorporating livestock than previously when using like fertilizers and things like that?
Well, so, you know, I never did use fertilizers. I've looked at my profitability, and my profit is $300 per acre each year. And I don't know what corn and soybean guys make, but I know that my profit compared to their profit is very stable. And, you know, this past year, fertilizer costs went up 200 to 300%. Fuel costs went up. And so when you're heavily, you know, with all of those huge inputs, your profitability goes down. This type of farming is exceedingly profitable because there's no inputs. I don't buy any fertilizer, any herbicides. I don't worm my cattle. I don't use fly sprays. There's just zero chemicals. And so your profitability, and then the other part of my profitability is direct marketing. If I were in the conventional cattle business and took my cattle to the stockyard, I would go from $300 an acre probably down to $50 an acre. Mm-hmm. But if you can direct market, you can cut out that middleman, and as a small farmer, be quite profitable.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think a lot of things come down to the economic resilience and just reducing the amount of money that you're spending when it comes to that profitability.
Yeah, the input cost, if you look at the statistics, the input costs have just risen year after year after year after year, to the point now that very few, you know, most farmers are breaking even at best, and sometimes losing money, and they have off-farm jobs to support their farming habit.
Mm-hmm. And we have two questions left. So for someone who wants to start transitioning their farm, what would you recommend as some first things to do? So it depends upon where you're starting from. I think if you have row crops, and this depends upon your money situation. But by far the best thing in the world you can do is to plant cover crops, both a warm season cover crop followed by a cool season cover crop. And get all of that biology restarted and going in your soils. And then after you've done that for a year, then you can go ahead and plant out perennial grasses if you're going to go into grazing. So I think you've got to get the soil biology stimulated first, and you'll just be far ahead of the game.
And the beauty of it is, it just keeps getting better every year. You know, when you're an annual cropper, when you have to plant your crop each year and harvest it and start all over next year, with perennial grasslands and this type of management, every year gets better, just doing nothing. We probably produce double the biomass, the grass on our farms than a farm that does continuous grazing. That's the other thing. The easiest thing in the world is anybody who's raising cattle or any kind of ruminant, and they're continuously grazing, if they'll just start dividing their fields up and doing rotational grazing, they can double their profits. They can increase their carrying capacity. They can double their carrying capacity by doing that. So, for instance, in our county, the average is 3 acres per cow. I have 1.3 acres per cow.
And then the last question from the chat is, what grass mix species are used in the pastures? So what percentage of cool season to warm season mix?
So, you know, all of our pastures around here are cool season grasses. We have some native warm seasons. I've never planted any warm season grasses. The natives, the other thing that you'll find that happens when you start giving your pastures those long periods of rest and recovery, the latent seed bank will start manifesting itself, and you will see all kinds of grasses come in that you had never seen. So tall fescue by far is our base grass, and it's going to be everybody's base grass in this area. It just is. It's a great grass. It's incredible tolerant to drought, any kind of insect damage. The problem that it has with livestock is it does produce an alkaloid that is a vasoconstrictor that during the summer months, it'll affect your cattle. They're less heat tolerant. They can vasoconstrict so much they can lose the tips of their ears. They can lose their tail switch. Their fertility goes down. But so what we do, what I do seed in my pastures are a lot of clovers, red and white clover. We've got meadow fescue in there. We have orchard grass, and then we have all of the quote weeds, which we call fords, like curly dock, chicory, and none of those we planted. You don't have to plant anything. Honestly, it'll just come once you start doing the rotational grazing. And what comes is what's going to be resilient. The problem with planting some of these high-priced, GMO or the best grass in the world is they're not very persistent. They cost you a lot of money, and you'll see in 2 or 3 years the fescue's back because it is so dominant around here.
So then my last question is, given that you said you often use perennials, do you often have to go and reseed any type of bulb patches or anything like that?
So what I do, I never like bare ground. So, after the cattle have been in a pasture, depending upon where they sat around and stuff like that, there might be some bare ground. And I carry around a bag of seed that has some annual ryegrass in it and some clover, and I'll throw that in that bare spot. And then if I've got some old hay or compost or whatever, I throw on top of that. But in general, no, you do not have to reseed at all. The grasses will reseed themselves. When we graze these pastures, it's not like you're mowing them with a lawnmower. It's not perfectly even. There's lots of patches that the cattle didn't eat. And once it's mature, they won't eat it the next time you come back. So it forms a seed head and reseeds, and the paddocks just get thicker and thicker and without ever reseeding them.
And then our last question is, what type of grass would you reiterate what causes problem for the cattle with the vasoconstriction?
So our tall fescue, the tall fescue around here is called Kentucky 31. And the vast majority of that have an endophyte which is a fungus that has infected the plant. And it's what gives that plant its resilience. That's why it's such a productive plant. It's incredible drought tolerant, insect tolerant, all of that due to that endophyte, that fungus. But unfortunately, that fungus produces an ergot alkaloid, which is a vasoconstrictor. And it's very low during the winter. And so that's what we graze during the winter. But in the summer, you can dilute out the alkaloid tremendously by having legumes. So we try to keep 30 to 40% of our pasture in clovers. And that is one thing I used to seed. I don't have to anymore. But frost seeding clover is so easy. So you just go out in the late winter, January, February, and you just broadcast the clover seed, and you don't have to do a lot. There's like 4 million seeds per pound of white clover. I just put a herd seeder on the back of my gator, hook up the motor to my battery, and it throws it out about 15 feet on both sides. So I did winter seed or frost seed clover for several years, but now it reseeds itself. But when you do it that time of the year, you start going through those freeze thaw cycles, and you get kind of this honeycombing. You probably all noticed it, honeycombing of the soil, and those little cracks and stuff. That seed falls down in there, and you get tremendous soil seed contact. The clover seed is small and dense. It's not very effective to seed grasses. Grass seeds are too light to put in a seeder like that. You almost have to go out there and just hand seed grasses. But when you got 200 acres, you can't do that. It's not practical. You'd have to no-till drill those in if you wanted to do grasses.
And I think that is our last question. So once again, I want to thank you, Jim. There was a lot of information in there, a lot more that I feel as though a lot of us still need to learn. But we really appreciate you being with us and sharing all your experience with us. And this session is being recorded. It will be available on YouTube in the next week or so if anyone wants to watch it or distribute it. And we thank you all for coming out. Remember, next month, we're going to have another Lunch and Learn last Wednesday of the month. That's March 29th. Also at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, going over 590 standards. And we look forward to having you there. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.